Could not find the text to read. 113. Chapter 6. Decision Making. Decisions are continuously being made by both individuals and teams. Some decisions are made subconsciously while others are the focus of much deliberate thought and debate. Healthy discussion considers multiple perspectives and weighs their relative strengths and weaknesses before coming to a decision. This chapter is divided into 3 major parts. First, we discuss the way people process information. Then, we describe the typical mistakes that occur when groups make decisions. Finally, we describe a systematic model of decision-making that encourages thoughtful and consistent team participation to avoid those mistakes. Case 6.1, Weapons of Mass Destruction. In March 2003, the United States decided to launch an invasion of Iraq. At the time, fear of the possibility of Iraq having weapons of mass destruction, WMD, was widely held and received broad coverage in the media. This created a deep concern that the United States was in great danger, which buffered the president and his administration from scrutiny for the decisions they made. The perceived risk had escalated to the point that it compromised objective and critical thinking. Though not all of the information has yet come to light, due to the fact that many records still remain sealed, there are meaningful data that suggest President George W. Bush and his cabinet fell into some of the common pitfalls of poor group decision-making as they launched a decade-long war. According to The Economist article History's Second Draft. Contrary to statements by President George W. Bush or Prime Minister Tony Blair, declassified records from both governments posted on the web reflect an early and focused push to prepare war plans and enlist allies regardless of conflicting intelligence about Iraq's threat and the evident difficulties in garnering global support. Perhaps most revealing about today's posting on the National Security Archive's website is what is missing any indication whatsoever from the declassified record to date that top Bush administration officials seriously considered an alternative to war. In contrast, there is an extensive record of efforts to energize military planning, revise existing contingency plans, and create a new, streamlined war plan. Some Bush officials insist the war decision was made just before the March 2003 invasion. The evidence does not support that construction. Others believe no decision was ever made. Richard Armitage. Working in teams. 114. Deputy Secretary of State under Colin Powell observes, "Never to my knowledge, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, did the president ever sit around with his advisors and say, should we do this or not? He never did it." George J. Tenet of the CIA agrees. He wrote, "There never was a serious debate that I know of within the administration about the imminence of the Iraqi threat." And again, based on conversations with colleagues, in none of the meetings can anyone remember a discussion of the central questions. Was it wise to go to war? Was it the right thing to do? Economist, 2010. This senior leadership team had come to believe in the presence of something that, if true, posed a catastrophic, horrifying, and unprecedented threat to America and her allies. In fact, the threat of a terrorist attack was so great that the administration overlooked contrary data that demonstrated an absence of WMDs, and that conclusion led to a decision that propelled the United States into the Iraq War. When the United States occupied Iraq and systematically searched for the WMDs and found none, the U.S. was in the position of not being able to justify an extreme act of aggression and a declaration of war. With an influential core of determined people driving toward a single conclusion, the conditions lent themselves to a groupthink climate in which dissent was discouraged. If this seasoned team of subject matter experts felt the pressure to conform to emotionally based decisions, what can everyday leaders do to ensure that the decisions their teams make are rational, evidence-based, objective, and intentional? How can they avoid similar decision-making mistakes? While mistakes will almost certainly be much lower and, therefore, easier to manage than the variables at play in the decisions leading up to the Iraq War, what can leaders do to maintain impartiality, encourage critical reflection on processes, and allow for enough consideration of questions like, Are we making the right decision? Case study discussion questions. 1. In teams, who is ultimately responsible for making the decisions? Why? 2. If you were present in the cabinet meetings that made the decision to invade Iraq, what would you have said or done differently? 3. Other than fear, what other factors influence the group's decision-making practices? Which do you think were the most pertinent? 4. Describe other examples involving high-stakes decision-making. How do they compare to this case? How do they differ? There are many advantages to group decision-making. The collective wisdom of groups can be far superior to the knowledge and decision-making ability of a single person. Sarofitsky, 2004. Groups will often have more information about any given subject than a single individual does. Furthermore, the process of group discussion and deliberation can foster critical analysis and reflection that can lead to high-quality decisions. But groups can also make terrible decisions. As a matter of fact, some very disastrous decisions, such as the U.S. decision to go to war with Iraq over the suspicion of weapons of mass destruction, have been made by groups as opposed to individuals. Chapter 6 Decision Making. 115. Information processing. Information processing is the series of cognitive processes that make sense of incoming sensory data. Words and nonverbal cues are perceived through the five senses, and ascribed meaning. This raw data are interpreted and evaluated based upon idiosyncratic as well as shared frames of reference. Past experiences, current assumptions, and the surrounding social context are used to decipher incoming messages. Argyris, 1994. Describes the process of perceiving and interpreting data as the ladder of inference, depicted below. Each step or rung describes how information is perceived and processed, beginning at the bottom of the ladder, and moving up. Cannon and Witherspoon, 2005. Perception and information processing occur unconsciously at the lower rungs of the ladder, and become more conscious as one moves up the ladder. However, over time, repetitive patterns of processing become ingrained and automatic. For example, learning to drive a car initially requires great concentration and effort, but eventually the process becomes routine, making conscious thought no longer necessary. Figure 6.1 Ladder of Inference. Available data. Take action. Draw conclusions. Interpret data. Select data. Working in teams. 116. In order to process incoming information quickly, individuals make assumptions and draw inferences based upon the perceptual data's similarity to past experiences. Thus, deliberate, conscious reflection is often neglected in favor of a pre-programmed response that is made in accordance with memories and tendencies associated with comparable past experiences. It would be inefficient for people to experience all new data as if it were their first time seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or touching that phenomenon. The benefit of this process is that people can respond quickly to stimulus without much conscious thought. The downside is that not all new experiences fit neatly into our database of previous experiences. Conscious reflection, whether done as an individual or in a group setting, is a practice that can help evaluate and revise old patterns of thinking as well as assumptions that are either outdated or limited in perspective. Selecting data. Human beings only have the capacity to pay attention to and process a limited amount of incoming data at one time. While some may have a greater capacity to multitask than others, the limit exists for all of us and requires us to select specific pieces of information or data on which to focus. For example, the first meeting of a group with a large number of participants convening in a new location will contain literally hundreds of pieces of perceptual data, including seating arrangement, lighting, room temperature, verbal messages, nonverbal messages, and interactions among members. Because there is simply too much information to attend to at the same time, we choose that which is most important to us. The internal process of selecting information to interpret, and then present to our conscious minds is not unlike that in which video editors engage. Although reality TV producers film hours of video footage, they air only a small percentage of the total interactions that occur among show participants, carefully selecting the pieces they wish to show the viewing audience. In the documentary Secrets of Reality TV Revealed, producers describe how they edit and manipulate data, scenes, in order to lead the audience to certain conclusions, and make the show more entertaining. In a similar way, it might be said that people have an internal producer that selects, screens, edits, and interprets data. Since it is impossible to pay attention to all available data, certain pieces of information are eliminated from awareness. For the sake of continuity and stability, people tend to look for evidence to confirm expectations and assumptions. Thus, the selection of data is influenced by existing assumptions, biases, and stereotypes. This reflexive loop leads people to see what they both want and expect to see, in turn reinforcing those beliefs, and making it more difficult to see things in a different light. This confirmation bias is the tendency to search for and interpret information that supports first impressions and preconceived notions. People are also more likely to attend to information that is perceived as important. For example, if a group is having a discussion about whether or not to request a deadline extension for an existing project, some members may have strong feelings about the issue, causing them to sit up and pay close attention. Members who are ambivalent about the topic may choose not to engage in the discussion, and only half-heartedly pay attention. In order to achieve the highest levels of group performance, members must continually ask themselves what they might be missing. Realizing that perception is limited and potentially flawed is the first step in opening up to new perspectives, and seeing things that have yet to. Chapter 6 Decision Making 117. Be discovered. Increased awareness and appropriate data selection comprise the first rung of the ladder of inference. Interpreting the data. Once data have been selected for processing, individuals must interpret that information. We interpret data by comparing the current situation to past experiences, which have been summarized and cataloged into core beliefs and assumptions called schemas. Griffith, 2004. Schemas are the internal dictionaries or rulebooks that are used to interpret incoming data quickly and efficiently. For example, a red light at an intersection is automatically interpreted as a symbol for stop, triggering a certain response by the driver of a car. The interpreted stimulus and resulting response is deeply ingrained as a habit that requires little to no awareness or conscious attention. Similarly, group members may hear a particular word or interpret a certain nonverbal gesture as a red light, danger, and disengage from the conversation. Under stress, people tend to revert to the deeply embedded primal responses of fight or flight, both of which can be counterproductive to meaningful communication. When tensions are running high, group members can easily default to emotion-laden reactions instead of thoughtful, reasoned responses. Biases, assumptions, and stereotypes include generalizations about groups, and can be based upon any number of variables including gender, age, race, or geographic background. For instance, after meeting a distant relative from New York City who talks fast and is very direct, one might create an internal stereotype about all New Yorkers. Thus, future interactions with anyone associated with New York can potentially be influenced by that initial experience. The generalizations about New Yorkers, in this example, have been created prematurely and with limited data, and thus are likely to be inaccurate and unfair. Yet we do this all the time. It is all too easy to discount a person's message because of the label we have put on him or her. Vague messages that have less concrete information to aid in interpretation are, consequently, more prone to misunderstanding. For example, if a male project leader told a female member that she was not pulling her weight in the group, she could internally respond to that statement from a variety of interpretive frameworks, including those related to the following. Her view of her own competence: I know I am competent. Her view of leaders: leaders are never satisfied. Her view of men: this is a typical male power play. Her view of the organization: Women can't get ahead in this organization. Her view of other members of the group, they're all threatened by me. Her view of groups in general, I knew this would happen, I hate working in teams. If she is not open-minded and reflective about the possible ways to interpret this statement, she may choose an interpretation that has very little to do with the intended message. Working in teams. 118. Of the team leader. Instead of a thoughtful response or a request for more information, she might respond with a pre-programmed reaction. If an individual is operating from an incorrect interpretation or assumption, and responds accordingly, misunderstandings and interpersonal problems that hinder group functioning are likely to result. Therefore, it is important for members to be aware of their own existing schemas, and to combat tendencies to make unsupported inferences. Active listening skills, which we will discuss later in the chapter, can go a long way in preventing misinterpretations and can lead to a more accurate understanding of what others are saying. Drawing conclusions. After a message has been interpreted, conclusions are drawn. Obviously, it is difficult to arrive at an accurate conclusion if the data have been misinterpreted. Beck, 1995, has found that when inaccurate conclusions are made, the mistakes leading up to the conclusion are remarkably similar across circumstances. The following list describes common mistakes people make when receiving and responding to messages. Overgeneralization. Conclusions are based upon a limited number of past experiences. Example, recycling programs don't work, we tried that once before. All or nothing thinking, also called dichotomous or black and white thinking. Viewing a situation as all or nothing without considering other possibilities or recognizing that most hypotheticals exist on a continuum. Example, we should make a decision today, or we should just forget about it. Catastrophizing. Assuming that a current negative experience will undoubtedly produce a devastating effect. Example, I bet I failed the test, I'm probably going to fail the course, and flunk out of college. Personalization. Speculating that the comments or behavior of others are related to you in some way. Example, Bob didn't sit next to me in the meeting today. I'm sure he's mad at me. I must have said something to offend him the last time we met. Emotional reasoning. Strong feelings about an issue or a person cloud one's ability to hear other perspectives. Example, she may have a good argument for the policy change, but I still don't trust her, and I'm not going to go along with it. Mind reading. A person attributes motives to others, and speculates on what they're thinking. Example, he was intentionally trying to hurt me by not calling last night. These common tendencies lead to inaccurate conclusions that translate into misguided actions. It is difficult to create an effective action strategy based upon poorly formed or distorted conclusions. A common problem in interpreting interpersonal behavior is the fundamental attribution error, which is an assessment of others that attributes behavior to personality traits. Chapter 6 Decision Making. 119. And underestimate social context. For example, a group member named John has become quiet and disengaged because he is annoyed by the lack of structure in the group's meetings. Observing this quiet behavior, and noticing a scowl on John's face, another member might make the fundamental attribution error, and conclude that John is angry by nature. From then on, this observer will likely select and interpret data about John based upon that assumption, and thus confirm that bias. Other possible explanations, such as whether or not the meetings were in fact poorly run, or whether the individual was under some unrelated pressure for time, may not have been given enough consideration. Once judgments have been made, it can be difficult to step back and reverse the process. The fundamental attribution error is a frequent information processing mistake that creates blind spots in perception and misunderstandings in communication. Taking action. When a verbal message is received, nonverbal cues and assumptions are used to interpret and evaluate it. Then, the receiver takes action or responds to the message. No two people will process information in exactly the same way. In group situations, leaders increase the level of mutual understanding by regularly summarizing what has been said and agreed upon. Another strategy is to ask group members to reflect upon the content of a discussion. This approach serves the same purpose as the summary but involves the perception of more members of the group instead of relying solely on the leader's understanding. Many groups record minutes to document the details of a discussion. Those minutes serve to reduce the ever-present potential for future misunderstandings, and the need to rehash old discussions. Good minutes record not only the decisions themselves, but also the reasons and support for those decisions. Boardroom scenes in The Apprentice are often quite interesting as Donald Trump asks project leaders and team members to explain their actions. He is basically asking them to describe their reasoning. What data or information did they use to make sense of the challenge given to them? How did they interpret that data? What conclusions did they draw that led to the actions they took? This process is known as moving down the ladder of inference and helps explain how a person or group approached a problem or dilemma. Once the thinking process is made transparent, individual and group behavior make more sense. It also identifies where the reasoning may have been inaccurate or short-sighted. For example, in the first challenge of Season 1, Trump asked the two teams to sell lemonade on the streets of New York. The women's team focused on the fact that location would be important, select data. In addition, the members chose Midtown Manhattan, where a lot of men would be present who would potentially be attracted to the women selling the lemonade, interpret data. Finally, they set a reasonable price point of $5 per glass but included a kiss with the purchase, which they thought would win over customers, draw conclusions. They executed their strategy, take action, and, in the end, beat the men's team by a margin of 3-1. The men, in contrast, chose a poor location and, in desperation, tried to sell glasses of lemonade for $1,000 each. Since this strategy did not have any data or logic to support it, it was doomed to fail. While some teams capitalize on the collective wisdom of the group, others make very poor decisions. How can such smart and competent people can make such bad decisions? Working in teams. 120. Common decision-making mistakes. Groupthink is one of the most common decision-making problems in groups. According to Ch6, 1982, groupthink is a mode of thinking that people engage in when they are deeply involved in a cohesive in-group, when the members striving for unanimity override their motivation to realistically appraise alternative courses of actions, page 9. Thus, groupthink often occurs in highly cohesive groups that have strong norms of cooperation and agreement. Decisions are initiated by high-status, influential members who generate momentum for a certain position. Because it is frowned upon to question the direction of the group, members are reluctant to speak up. In addition to highly cohesive groups, teams that are under pressure to make quick decisions can also fall prey to groupthink. A few individuals can promote a certain idea, and then pressure others to agree for the sake of time and expediency. When groups make decisions, it is easy for them to demonstrate overconfidence in their conclusions, Kerr and Indale, 2004. Without fully considering the depth or complexity of the problems that they are trying to solve, groups can draw superficial and ill-conceived conclusions. Even when groups are initially unsure of the decisions they make, they become more confident over time. After they have made a decision, and initiated a course of events, they can be overly committed to their plan, and unwilling to acknowledge the possibility that they made a mistake. Another common problem in group decision-making is the tendency of groups to make premature decisions. When faced with a decision, groups often consider only a few options before making their decision. For example, in a class where students are asked to identify a problem on campus they would like to address during the semester, teams often consider only a handful of options before making a decision. When forced to use a structured brainstorming process in which each individual takes 10 minutes to create a list of ideas before combining them into a larger list, teams generate 50 to 60 unique ideas instead of a mere 5 or 6. Another problem with premature decision-making is that groups rarely have a deep and nuanced understanding of the issues upon which they are deciding. They simply have not had enough time to consider how the issues are embedded in larger organizational and institutional contexts. Confirmation bias occurs when members look for information to confirm a decision that, for the most part, has already been made. Nickerson, 1998. Group decisions are often made on an emotional level, and only afterward do members look for data or reasoning too. Chapter 6 Decision Making. 121. Support their decision. This happens more frequently than we might care to admit. When confronted with a decision, group members have an initial reaction or response that leads to a potentially short-sighted decision. After coming to a conclusion, members then look for evidence to justify their positions. This common practice can greatly reduce the overall quality of decisions that are made by a group. A similar problem is when members are reluctant to voice unique information, as seen in the following decision-making mistake. Shared information bias is the tendency of group members to spend most of their time discussing information that is already known by most members. Baker, 2010, Booz, Schauenberg, Strack, and Bells, 2013. In other words, it is easier for members to discuss information that most people already agree upon than it is to bring a new and novel perspective to the discussion. In some cases, members may not feel that what they know is important and, therefore, are reluctant to contribute. Another possible deterrent to speaking up is the possibility that a member's perspective will be challenged by the group. In order to avoid the discomfort of being an outlier, they remain silent. In either situation, potentially important information is not considered in the decision-making process. Group polarization is the tendency for groups to make more extreme decisions than any individual member of the group would make. When a certain idea or concept starts to gain momentum in a group discussion, it can take on a life of its own. It can grow to the point that no member would endorse it individually, but collectively, it appears that the group fully supports it. Examples of this dynamic are abundant in today's political landscape. During budget talks, Republicans and Democrats become more entrenched in their positions and are unable to arrive at a compromise with one another. When a decision is time-sensitive and under pressure, movement toward the extremes can be difficult to slow down. Someone has to be willing to break ranks and suggest that perhaps the group has gone a bit too fast and too far on any given decision. While groups benefit greatly from such a deviant role, not many individuals are willing to play it. At times, groups make decisions that produce ineffective or adverse results. But even as mounting evidence confirms a poor decision, groups can experience an escalation of commitment to that course of action. Moser, Wolf, and Kraft, 2013. Group decisions often require the investment of resources such as time, money, and effort in order to achieve the desired results. When the results are not forthcoming, groups can be reluctant to cut their losses and choose another course of action. Instead, they double down and decide to put more resources into a failing proposition. Gambling in the face of significant losses, continued investment in long-term conflict such as the Vietnam War, and the subprime mortgage crisis that produced the global recession of 2008 are all examples of an escalation of commitment. The next section describes a structured framework that can help groups avoid making bad decisions. Functional model of decision-making. In light of the potential for groups to make poor decisions, a functional model of decision-making allows groups to be more deliberate, thorough, and systematic in the decisions they make. Forsyth, 2006. Many of the shortcomings of group decision-making can be addressed by establishing a system that challenges premature consensus and encourages diverse. Working in teams. 122. Perspectives. Poor decisions can be avoided by implementing a structured decision-making process that includes orientation, discussion, decision rule, and implementation. Orientation. When groups are given a problem to solve, there is a strong temptation to start proposing various solutions before appropriately defining the problem and planning the decision-making process. The orientation phase of group decision-making begins with a thorough understanding of the problem to be solved. Group members are well advised to understand the task at hand from multiple perspectives before launching into problem-solving mode. Teams can waste a lot of time trying to solve poorly understood problems. Characteristics of a good solution should be identified and posted in a public place during the orientation process. For example, students who want to improve the dorm food on campus might need to find a solution that A. Students approve, B. Won't cost more money for the school, C. The administration would be willing to embrace, and D. The dining staff are capable of implementing. Those criteria need to be identified before students start brainstorming ideas about the types of food they want to see in the cafeteria, or a lot of time could be wasted. In addition to thoroughly understanding the problem to be solved, effective groups create a process for making decisions. For example, they might set aside a specific amount of time to collect data about the problem, and then meet to discuss that information. Then, they might have a session devoted to brainstorming possible solutions and identifying their 3 best options that address the problem. After more research on those 3 options, the team leader might call for a vote. Once a decision is made, the group might spend time creating a detailed implementation strategy. This type of orientation schedule helps everyone know what is expected and how the group is going to use its time. Discussion. Discussion allows members to voice their perspectives and critically evaluate options. These conversations are a form of critical reflection in which members analyze issues and weigh the pros and cons of various decisions. Educational reformer and philosopher John Dewey described reflective thought as active, persistent, and careful consideration of any belief or supposed form of knowledge in the light of the grounds that support it, and the further conclusions to which it tends. 1910, page 6. In this way, the practice of reflection can help group members monitor their assumptions and critically evaluate the decisions they are considering. Griffith and Frieden, 2000. Reflective discussions identify the facts, formulas, and theories that are relevant for supporting existing positions and for solving complex and ill-defined problems. King and Kitchener, 1994. The highest level of reflective thinking assumes that knowledge is gained from a variety of sources and is understood in relationship to a specific context. While it may be impossible to arrive at a perfect understanding of a given issue, judgments based upon conceptual soundness, empirical justification, or personal experience are a good starting place. Effective groups are receptive to a multitude of options and perspectives, but Chapter 6 Decision Making 123. Are clear about the criteria upon which they base their decisions and actions. The process of reflective discussion accomplishes the following objectives: to consider multiple perspectives, to identify the assumptions for one's interpretations, to critique the accuracy of and evidence for one's conclusions, to evaluate the effectiveness of one's actions. Individuals who are not reflective may not understand how their behavior affects the group. For example, in some groups a small number of members can dominate discussions. They speak without listening and offer opinions without a deep understanding of what is being discussed. Conversely, there are members who overanalyze and cautiously rehearse their responses before speaking out, causing them to miss the opportunity to contribute as the discussion moves on without them. Group members are unlikely to change until they become aware of their patterns of processing and participation. For this reason, reflecting on one's own communication patterns is an important practice. Psychologist Carl Jung, whose ideas form the basis for the Myers-Briggs type indicator, asserted that the general way in which individuals participate in groups can be categorized into 2 processing styles. Barbuto, 1997. People are either introverted or extroverted. Introverts are energized by being alone and tend to process their thoughts internally. Extroverts, on the other hand, are energized by being with people and process their thoughts aloud. Introverts prefer more time before responding so they can pull their thoughts together and present coherent ideas and perspectives. Extroverts, on the other hand, prefer fast-moving and active discussions. They tend to do their reflecting verbally, and subsequently will offer ideas that may not have been thoroughly thought out or complete. Team leaders who are aware of the personality types of their members will seek to facilitate a conversational pace suited to all. In addition, they will monitor the amount of relative talk time among members, ensuring that all members, especially those who are introverted, are contributing equally to the discussion. Senga, 1990, warns against falling into the trap of making overly simplistic causal evaluations without consideration of the large, complex systems within which decisions exist. Systems thinking is an approach to problem solving that encourages group members. Working in teams. 124. To resist a reductionist view of problems that can result in short-sighted solutions and unintended consequences. Ideas, decisions, and plans must be considered in light of the context within which they will be implemented. As Schemas suggests, today's problems are often the result of yesterday's well-meaning but ill-conceived solutions. Groups are often guilty of taking action without fully considering all of their options, and without understanding the consequences of their decisions. The individual and collective practices of reflection serve to slow down the communication process, consider multiple perspectives, and identify evidence for various conclusions. Decision rule. There are a number of ways that groups can come to a decision. Because there are dozens of decisions that need to be made on most projects, it is inefficient for the leader to bring all of them before the group. Therefore, some decisions are made by the leader without consulting the rest of the team. Of course, one of the tricky aspects of leading teams is knowing which decisions can be made alone and which need the input of others. Even if a leader has the authority and the experience to make a certain decision, seeking input from the team can build trust and commitment. Another decision-making strategy is for the leader to delegate the decision to one or more members of the group. In all of these options, the power to make the decision rests with the leader or with those whom he or she designates. Some decisions need the full attention of the group, and thus include a full discussion and debate. After a topic has been exhausted or a designated amount of time has passed, someone may call for a vote. Parliamentary procedures such as Robert's Rules of Order provide a detailed and structured procedure for voting. One of the most common voting schemes that groups use to make a decision is majority rule. In this case, votes are counted, and the option that has garnered the most votes wins. Majority vote could also mean that for an option to win, it must have more than 50% of all the possible votes. So, even within the concept of majority rule, there are some gray areas. The exact definition of what it takes to win should be determined at the beginning of a discussion before votes are cast. Finally, some decisions are made by consensus. This can be a time-consuming process, as groups continue to deliberate until they find a solution with which everyone in the group can agree. For example, in most jury deliberations, the jury must come to a unanimous decision to arrive at a verdict. Poole and Dobish, 2010. Because there are often multiple ways of viewing things, this may be a difficult goal to achieve. When juries cannot come to an agreement about the guilt or innocence of a defendant, they are known as a hung jury, and the judge declares a mistrial. Consensus is an admirable decision-making goal but may not be realistic in all situations. Implementation. After a decision is made, teams will often create an implementation plan to put the decision into action. This is the last phase of the functional decision-making model. Once a decision has been made, tasks can be assigned, deadlines determined, and schedules created. For example, teams might use some of the project management strategies discussed in Chapter 6 Decision Making. 125. Chapter 3 To create a project plan and begin work. At this point in the process, an assessment strategy can also be created in order to measure the quality of the decision and the implementation of the solution. Influences on group decisions. The influence of powerful members and the reluctance to take a stand against the majority can compromise the collective wisdom of groups. As groups discuss options, and make decisions, individual members can have tremendous influence over the direction of the group. While it can be difficult for members to question a popular idea held by the majority of the group, it is often the courage of a lone individual who is willing to challenge the status quo that saves the day. The following section will discuss the deterrents to open and balanced communication and highlight the importance of dissenting opinions. Status and influence. Issues of status and power are always present in group settings as members strive to influence the decisions, direction, and performance of the group. Christian Barling, 2010. Members gain power through a number of means and use various strategies to influence others and garner support for their ideas. Social status, a concept related to power, is defined as the degree to which a group member has influence over other members of a social network. Sell, Lavaglia, Mannix, Samuelson, and Wilson, 2004. Whereas power implies force, and pushing others to do something they may not want to do, group members themselves confer status upon individuals based upon an assessment of their potential value to the group. Crackhart, 1990, Sell, Lavaglia, Mannix, Samuelson, and Wilson, 2004. Figure 6.2 The speed of decisions. Amount of time needed to make a decision. Leader alone. Leader with consultation. Majority rule. Consensus. Working in teams. 126. Status allocation, which can occur even before members meet for the first time, can be based upon reputation, past performance, education level, or position in the organization. Over time, status differentiation takes place and status hierarchies form. Power dynamics are most obvious in groups where there is a diversity of perspectives, open disagreement, and interpersonal conflict. Diagnosing power in groups that are homogeneous and conflict-free may be a bit more difficult, as influence strategies are typically more subtle. So who exactly are these powerful, high-status members? In his best-selling book The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell, 2002, argues that social movements from fashion trends to attitudes about morality are instigated and perpetuated by a relatively few, yet influential, individuals. Through his analysis of phenomena such as the resurgence of hush puppy shoes, the influence of Paul Revere, and the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, Gladwell identifies three types of influential people: mavens, salespeople, and connectors. Mavens have specialized knowledge and information that give them credibility. Salespeople are optimistic, enthusiastic, likable, and highly persuasive. Connectors are at the hub of communications within and among social networks. Thus, Gladwell suggests, people gain status either through A. knowledge and reputation, B. degree of likability, or C. a prominent position within communication networks. Status is granted to those who are perceived as being competent and knowledgeable. High-status individuals are valued within organizational and team contexts because they have a reputation for getting things done. Pfeffer, 1992. When faced with important deadlines or confronted by challenging obstacles, groups look to these individuals for wisdom and guidance. Crackhart, 1990, found that those with the reputation for getting things done are granted high status in organizations, and consequently are solicited for work-related advice. Furthermore, people in the study who had high status were also good at identifying others with high status. In other words, they were able to accurately assess and utilize stop-choose networks to their own advantage. Knowledge and perceived competence aside, people who are friendly and likable tend to have higher positions in social networks than those who are not. The reason for this is that people have a more difficult time saying no to a friend than to a stranger or to a person they don't like. This is one of the reasons why home and relationally based businesses such as Tupperware and Mary Kay Cosmetics are so successful. Their marketing strategies capitalize on the importance of likability and friendships. Pfeffer, 1992. These business models rely upon friendly salespeople inviting people they know into their homes in order to present their products. Even if guests are not interested in the products, it can be enjoyable to socialize with others, and therefore relatively painless to make a small purchase in order to maintain positive social connections. Finally, those who are at the social center of their own group, and who have connections with other groups are well positioned to have high status. Being at the hub of a communications network allows one to be privy to knowledge and information that others may not have. Controlling the flow of information gives one the discretion to selectively choose which information is passed on to other members of the group. This gatekeeping role effectively establishes one's importance, and ensures influence over group actions and decisions. Those who are skilled can guide the discussion in whatever direction they choose, giving them tremendous influence over group decisions and direction. Meanwhile, connections among groups give individuals access to a greater amount of knowledge and resources. Chapter 6 Decision Making 127. High-status members who have connections among multiple groups are potential power brokers who have the opportunity to create alliances and coalitions. This enables them to broker resources and negotiate solutions to complex problems. Thus, the more connections one has with other groups, the more importance and status one will have in his or her own group. For example, one undergraduate student describes the power of social networking like this: I am on the board of Grassroots, an umbrella service organization that connects students to other nonprofits in several different sectors: education, homelessness, hunger, etc. It is very clear in this type of setting that those who have the highest status and respect in the group are the ones who are most involved in other service organizations around campus. This is because they are able to provide connections to other organizations, and are typically the ones who have the best ideas for how to grow our organization. Status can also be attributed to people for a number of reasons such as gender, race, physical attractiveness, socioeconomic status, occupation, and education level. These variables, known as diffuse status characteristics, may have little to do with the specific tasks of the team, yet they still influence how group members are perceived and judged. Take, for example, a middle-aged, male, Caucasian physician serving on a school task force charged with evaluating a school bus maintenance program. This person may know very little about vehicle maintenance or its costs, but he may be given great respect by other group members simply because he is a white, male doctor. Based on these characteristics, people assume him to be intelligent and qualified even when the task at hand lies outside of his expertise. In contrast to diffuse characteristics, specific status characteristics are qualities that are directly relevant to the task or decision at hand. Returning to the bus maintenance example, a Hispanic woman in her mid-20s who works as a maintenance manager for a rental car company may be granted high status on the task force because of her specific status characteristics. This is despite her diffuse status characteristics as a young, female minority member, which can unconsciously and unfairly be judged in unflattering ways. In the world of status attribution, some people are given more status than they deserve while others are given less than they deserve. Unfortunately, those with low status can feel marginalized and detached from the group. In contrast to low-status members, high-status members tend to speak up more and play a more active role in group discussions. Keltner, Grunfeld, and Anderson, 2003. Active members both acquire and use their status by validating certain viewpoints, summarizing discussions, and telling others what to do. Stiles, Lyle, Knight, X, Wong, Hall, and Primo, 1997. In the presence of influential members like these, it can be intimidating to speak up and share a potentially unpopular perspective. Instead, some members just feign agreement and avoid any potential conflict. High-status members help teams overcome inertia, make decisions, and take action. For those who wish to influence the direction of their teams, Pfeffer, 1992, has identified a practical, 7-step model for applying power dynamics, page 29. Decide what your goals are, what you are trying to accomplish. Diagnose patterns of dependence and interdependence, which individuals are influential and important in helping you achieving your goal. Working in teams. 128. Predict what these individuals' points of view are likely to be. How will they feel about what you are trying to do? Determine what external power bases you will contend with. Which of them will have the most influence in the decision? Determine your own bases of power and influence. What bases might you develop in order to gain more control over the situation? Decide which of the various strategies and tactics for exercising power are most appropriate, which are likely to be effective, given the situation you confront. Based upon the above, choose a course of action to accomplish goals and objectives. Pressure to conform. Group membership often requires individuals to surrender some amount of individuality in order to gain entrance and acquire the benefits associated with membership. The extent to which groups influence their members varies greatly from group to group. Some groups have rigid rules and roles for members, while others give tremendous latitude. For members to be in good standing with their peers, they typically must conform to some concept of normal behavior for that particular group. Cialdini and Goldstein, 2004. And while diversity gives groups an advantage in problem solving and creativity, conformity benefits the group by creating cohesion, predictability, and structure. In a series of well-known experiments conducted in the 1950s, Solomon Asch gave groups of 8 to 10 college students the simple task of comparing the lengths of 3 lines on one card to a standard length line on another card. Asch, 1956. Simply put, students were asked to identify which of the 3 lines on the right was the same length as the line on the left. Line comparisons. Even though the answer was obviously C, most students chose A or B. How could this be? The answer is in the way the experiment was set up. All but one student in the group, the real subject, were Confederates instructed to give erroneous answers a majority of the time. The experimenters were interested in understanding to what degree peer pressure would affect participant responses. They found that when participants were tested individually, only 5% answered incorrectly. When tested in a group setting and exposed to a majority opinion that was incorrect, however, Asch and his colleagues were quite surprised to find that 37 out of 50, 74%, gave a wrong. A, B, C. Chapter 6 Decision Making. 129. Answer. When the majority was unanimous in its incorrect answer, subjects were even less likely to give the right answer. As subsequent studies have confirmed, it is extremely difficult for individuals to diverge from a majority opinion, especially when they are completely alone in their opposition. Furthermore, the pressure to conform is generally stronger in collectivist cultures, which place a strong emphasis on interdependence and group cohesion, than in individualistic cultures, which value autonomy and individuality. Bond and Smith, 1996. From the classic Asch studies and others like it, social psychologists have concluded that groups have significant influence over individual members. For example, jury deliberations that determine a defendant's guilt or innocence are immensely important decisions that require consideration of all perspectives. However, 45 years of research on jury deliberation reveals that jury members followed the initial opinions of the majority 90% of the time. Devine, Clayton, Dunford, Sang, and Price, 2001. This evidence strongly suggests that values and norms held by a majority of group members can be difficult to resist, no matter how important the task or impactful the decision. Divergent Perspectives. It is all too often that groups miss out on the very best ideas, and fail to prevent major decision-making catastrophes because members decide not to voice their insights or objections for fear of being rejected, ridiculed, or reprimanded by the group. The effectiveness of groups is dependent, in part, on the ability of group members to banter and vigorously discuss various ideas and strategies. When members hold back or avoid sharing their perspective, the potential synergy of the group is compromised. If a group member has an opinion on an issue, he or she should be able to offer it to the group with confidence. In an interview published by the Harvard Business Review, J. Richard Hackman, 2009, emphasized the need to have at least one designated deviant in every group, page 1. A designated deviant is a person who is assigned the role of devil's advocate, and vigilantly questions popular assumptions, challenges the status quo, and ensures that all perspectives are considered before a decision is made. According to Hackman, the designated deviant's observations can open up creative discussion, but they also raise others' anxiety level. People may feel compelled to crack down. Maybe even knock him off the team. Don't let that happen. If you lose your deviant, your team can become mediocre. Page 1. As long as the designated deviant is earnest in his or her efforts to question the ongoing discussions and decisions of the team, he or she is a tremendous benefit. But because this can be a tiring role to play, astute leaders should support, protect, encourage, and empower their deviant. Leadership in action. When working in teams, you will find that the very best of human nature comes out, as well as the very worst, especially when difficult decisions have to be made. When you reach working in teams. 130. A difficult situation or challenge, automatic responses such as flaring tempers, judgmental attitudes, and impatience only serve to make matters worse. The following top 10 list presents some of the hard lessons we've learned from working in teams. They are reminders to us all about how to navigate the tough spots. 1. In work and life, anger and frustration never help the process. 2. In work and life, being trustworthy is a good thing. 3. In work and life, be easy on the people, and tough on the problem. 4. In work and life, fairness isn't the issue. So avoid that bias. 5. In work and life, clear communication is the key. 6. In work and life, take your time. 7. In work and life, be open and true to your values from the start. 8. In work and life, chalk the field before you play. 9. When you're going through hell, keep going. Winston Churchill. 10. An ounce of prevention equals a pound of cure. Taking time, being reflective, and honoring the decision-making process are common themes throughout this list. Taking time to do things right the first time, taking time to de-escalate feelings such as anger or frustration, taking time to communicate clearly and effectively, and taking time to define the scope of the project, meeting, or decision at hand all involve extra steps, extra effort, extra presence of mind, and extra discipline. But those little extras can yield exceptional results. Even in the best of teams, conflict of some type is likely to emerge over contentious decisions. The decision-making process is often questioned by members, and sometimes leaders are unfairly critiqued and scrutinized. In the early stages of a group, members are inclined to go along with the opinions of influential members for the sake of cooperation. But at some point, they begin to challenge the process. If a foundation of honest and respectful communication has been established, differences of opinion can be managed in a productive way that allows all perspectives to be considered. This process, according to Tuckman, is the norming phase of group development, and includes a re-examination of group processes, and an appreciation for member differences. At this point, cohesion and trust are deepened and teams are ready to enter the performing phase. Arriving at the performing stage, teams have emerged from the darkness of storming and charted a new course in norming. Teams in the performing stage have clearly stated expectations, shared rules, clarified roles and responsibilities, and a list of core values to which the entire team can be held accountable. Groups have learned how to avoid making premature, ill-advised decisions and, instead, use a systematic and thoughtful process for deliberation and problem-solving. Of course, this stage is not permanent, nor is it without risk. Leaders must be willing to identify and address issues that might lead to a second trip through storming and into norming. Teamwork is a highly variable undertaking. Sometimes it's necessary to cycle back to earlier stages in order to continually improve team functioning. Chapter 6 Decision Making. 131. Ultimately, honesty, candor, transparency, and a willingness to resist anger, personalization, and reactivity are all great ways to harness the collective wisdom of teams. Effective leaders are willing to speak unpopular truths, ask unpopular questions, and suggest unpopular processes in order to manage the tenuous balance between support and challenge found in high-performance teams. The short-term investment might be high, but the long-term payoff is invaluable. Key terms: Information processing 115, confirmation bias 116, schemas 117, fundamental attribution error 118, groupthink 120, overconfidence 120, premature decisions 120. Confirmation bias 120, shared information bias 121, group polarization 121, escalation of commitment 121, systems thinking 123, diffuse status characteristics 127, specific status characteristics 127. Discussion questions. 1. Explain the ladder of inference. How does it help us understand the potential problems in processing information? 2. Name the 7 common decision-making problems presented in the chapter, and give a real-life example of 3. 3. What are the 4 stages of the functional model of decision-making? Briefly describe the importance of each. Recall a time when you observed this process in action. 4. Gladwell, 2002, identifies 3 types of influential people. Name and describe them. 5. Pfeffer, 1992, identifies a practical, 7-step model for applying power dynamics in groups and organizations. What are the 7 steps? 6. Describe the experiment that Ash, 1956, conducted with college students. What do the results tell us about group dynamics and decision-making? 7. Name and describe the 3 major influences on group decision-making. Group activities. Exercise 6.1, Millennial Peace Prize. In groups of 4 to 5 students, imagine you are on a committee working with the Nobel Peace Prize organization. You have been asked to award a $5 million Millennial Peace Prize to the Nobel laureate who has made the biggest impact on world peace in the new. Working in teams. 132. Millennium. The organization has already created a short list of previous winners for you to consider. They are Jimmy Carter, 2002, Shireen Akbadi, 2003, Muhammad Yunus, 2006, and Barack Obama, 2009. Rank order this list from your top choice to your last choice, and provide a strong rationale for the ranking. Describe your process in making this decision. Exercise